The deserters never imagined what would happen next. They had planned to quietly row a small boat away from the chaos of the battlefield, only to be caught in a sudden storm. Luckily, in the midst of danger, they spotted a deserted island not far away. They jumped off the wooden boat and swam toward the island with every ounce of strength they had. After exhausting effort, 5 deserters struggled ashore, but only 4 survived. Leroy immediately prepared to climb to higher ground to survey the surroundings, but just after he left, his companions suddenly heard gunshots behind them. He spun around quickly and saw a group of Japanese soldiers appear on the beach. Panicked, he ran without a second thought. He hid behind a large wooden stump, anxiously peering toward the shore. He saw that his companions had all been captured by the Japanese soldiers. Under guard, they were forced to dig their own graves. Powerless, Leroy could only watch as his companions finished digging, knelt on the ground, and were shot one by one. Each gunshot pierced deeply into the heart of Leroy, who already despised killing. Overcome with grief and helplessness, he lay motionless, terrified of being discovered. At that moment, he suddenly sensed a sound behind him. He turned his head sharply and saw a Japanese officer on horseback, scanning the distance. Fortunately, the officer did not notice Leroy hidden in the shadows. Having lost his companions and filled with rage, Leroy slowly raised his rifle. He wanted to avenge his brutally killed comrades, but after hesitating for a long time, he still could not find the courage to pull the trigger. He knew that once he fired and revealed himself, his chance of survival would be gone. In the end, he trembled as he slowly lowered the gun, then quickly got up and ran deep into the island. He kept fleeing into the forest, desperate to put as much distance as possible between himself and the Japanese soldiers. Yet because he had not fired the shot, he was consumed by deep guilt. He cursed himself endlessly, calling himself a coward. Every rustle of wind and movement around him made his nerves tense. He ran through the forest for 2 full days, and by then, weakened by thirst, hunger, and exhaustion, his mind began to blur. Combined with the torment of his earlier hesitation, he slowly raised his gun, wanting to end this endless suffering, but after hesitating again, he still could not pull the trigger. Suddenly, he screamed in a frenzy, threw the gun away, and ran even deeper into the forest. He wandered alone in the forest for 5 days, yet never found a way out. Hiding inside a hollow tree, he cried helplessly, believing he would die in this vast forest. At that moment, he unexpectedly encountered the indigenous people of the forest. He was taken back to their tribe. Everyone in the tribe was curious about the suddenly appearing white man and gathered around to stare at him. Soon, the man who would become the tribal leader arrived with his followers. He shouted to the crowd that the sudden appearance of Leroy could bring disaster to the tribe. He intended to burn Leroy alive as a sacrifice to the gods, praying for the tribe's future safety and prosperity. Although he could not understand the indigenous language, the sharp-minded Leroy had already guessed his fate. Just as he fell into helpless despair, a woman suddenly stepped forward. She stared at the man who was about to become the tribal leader without saying a word, then quickly walked over to Leroy. In the end, she directly saved Leroy and decisively took him back to her home. Leroy survived by sheer luck. It turned out that the woman's father had been the tribal chief, but a few days earlier, he had mysteriously died while out hunting. She knew that the man about to become the new leader had murdered her father for the position, but she had no evidence, and as a woman, she had no way to avenge him, so she believed that Leroy's sudden appearance was a gift from the heavens. She cared for Leroy with meticulous devotion, patiently taught him the tribal language, and even willingly became his wife. And Leroy felt as if he had found a long-dreamed paradise here. There was no war, no killing, a loving wife by his side. And staying here meant avoiding military pursuit and shedding the identity of a deserter, so he happily decided to stay and live a carefree life, unwilling to return. But after only a few peaceful days, his new wife pushed him onto the arena to compete with that man for the position of chief. Though he appeared calm, as a deserter who feared war and despised violence, his heart was already in turmoil. Soon, under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the two began a fight to the death. Although Leroy was tall, his movements were clearly less agile and sharp, and he was quickly stabbed several times. Yet in the end, Leroy unexpectedly struck his opponent's heart with a single blow. This was the first time Leroy had ever killed, and the first time he had taken a life at such close range. He lay there motionless, stunned into silence for a long time. After the duel ended, Leroy personally carried the man's body back to his home. The man's mother stared at Leroy without saying a single word. From that battle on, Leroy earned legendary status and fully gained the tribe's respect. Whenever he had the chance, he stood on the platform and delivered passionate speeches, Just like the officers he once knew in the army, under his constant speeches, the people of the tribe grew increasingly energized, feeling as if they had endless strength. With everyone's support, Leroy finally became the tribe's first white leader. After that, Leroy lived quietly in the tribe for 2 full years, until one afternoon 2 years later, when an Allied aircraft suddenly appeared in the sky near the tribe. Before long, 2 Allied soldiers jumped from the plane and began a parachute landing. One of them never expected his dramatic entrance to end with him hanging upside down from a tree, utterly humiliated. Meanwhile, his clumsy-looking black companion landed safely on the ground. With no other choice, he hurriedly called out to his companion for help. The companion quickly ran over, pulled out a knife, and cut the ropes. Furious, Fairborn was about to stand up and curse his companion's clumsiness when he suddenly noticed many indigenous people emerging from the nearby forest. Sensing the danger, Fairborn quickly took out a cigarette, but the others only stared at him in silence. Left with no option, Fairborn lit one himself and tried to speak to them, but they could not understand his words and simply gestured for him to follow them. After thinking it over, Fairborn and his companion ultimately chose to go with the indigenous people. During a rest stop, to prevent the indigenous people from harming them, Fairborn deliberately arranged for his black companion to take turns keeping watch. As he spoke, Fairborn soon fell into a deep sleep, but when he opened his eyes, he realized they had already become prisoners of the indigenous people. The two were carried back to the tribe on their shoulders. Entering the indigenous tribe for the first time, Fairborn looked around in panic and curiosity. He was stunned to discover that the tribal leader was also a white man, just like himself. Fairborn immediately seized the opportunity and introduced himself, saying that he was a British soldier. He claimed that he had parachuted into the jungle under orders to negotiate cooperation with the native tribe. No matter what he said, the leader Leroy only stared at him in silence. Leroy had once been a deserter who accidentally became the leader of a primitive tribe. He had planned to live here in peace and avoid war, but the sudden arrival of Fairborn and his companion completely disrupted his plans. After careful thought, he returned under cover of night to question the 2 soldiers about their true purpose. Through their conversation, he learned that the Japanese forces were now at the end of their strength. The Allied forces were about to launch a massive counteroffensive in the Pacific. Fairborn's mission was to contact the native tribes and fight together to drive the Japanese off the island. Before Fairborn could finish speaking, Leroy decisively refused. Having deserted because he despised war, and now finally living in peace as a tribal leader, Leroy had no intention of dragging his people into a conflict that had nothing to do with them. Early the next morning, he gathered the tribal elders and warmly hosted the 2 British soldiers. At the banquet, he once again formally rejected joining the Allies. He told Fairborn that the Japanese troops were stationed only along the coast and never entered the jungle. They likely did not even know that we existed. I will never give up a peaceful life to fight the Japanese alongside you. After the feast, Leroy personally escorted Fairborn and his companion out of the tribe, but unwilling to give up, Fairborn continued trying to persuade him to join the Allies. Determined to stay away from war, Leroy stood up and walked away. Before leaving, he turned back and warned Fairborn that if they entered his territory again, he would kill them himself. Even if he did not kill them, he would bind them and hand them over to the Japanese. With that, he angrily turned and left. What Leroy never expected was that no sooner had he returned to the tribe than Fairborn and his companion followed him back. With no other choice, Leroy agreed to let them stay for one night, planning to send them farther away the next day. But that very night, Fairborn and his companion turned on their radio and reported the situation to their superiors. Their radio signal was intercepted by the Japanese forces on the island. The next morning, just as Leroy opened his eyes, he saw a warplane rapidly approaching from the distance. The people of the tribe watched in curiosity, completely unaware that danger was closing in. At the critical moment, Leroy shouted for everyone to hide, but they still could not escape the fate of being slaughtered. In an instant, the entire tribe was filled with cries and screams. Enraged, Leroy immediately shouted at the British soldiers who had arrived 2 days earlier. His wife had accidentally seen them secretly using the radio the previous night. Leroy knew at once that the radio signal had been intercepted, leading to the bombing and massacre. The British soldiers realized their mistake and apologized repeatedly in deep remorse. No matter how much they apologized, the tribe's location had already been exposed. Those who had died in the bombing could never be brought back. Furious, Leroy wanted to burn the 2 British soldiers alive to appease the innocent souls who had just perished, but Fairborn told him that even if they were killed, new envoys would still be sent to seek cooperation, and if he killed them, The British forces would not spare him once they landed. His entire tribe would pay a heavy price for his recklessness. Hearing this, the helpless leader could only crouch down in curse and despair. Seizing the moment, Fairborn again urged Leroyd to lead the tribe in resisting the Japanese together with the Allies. He told Leroyd that now there was no turning back and the Japanese could appear at any time. Cooperating with us is your only choice. We will provide sufficient weapons and ammunition and send instructors to train you. Only in this way can you truly protect yourselves. For the sake of preventing further destruction of his people, a powerless Leroyd finally agreed to fight the Japanese alongside the British forces, but he put forward one condition, that he must sign an agreement with the Allied Supreme Commander in the Pacific, MacArthur. He demanded that after driving out the Japanese forces and ending the war, the Allies must recognize the tribe's territorial sovereignty. He demanded recognition of the tribe as a free and independent nation in order to complete the mission of winning Leroyd over to fight the Japanese. The British officer Fairborn agreed without hesitation. Soon, Allied aircraft dropped large quantities of weapons and ammunition to the tribe, along with several military instructors specifically assigned to train the natives. Immediately afterward, the tribe began intensive learning and training. As agreed, Fairborn then left the tribe to find MacArthur and sign the peace agreement guaranteeing the tribe's post-war independence and freedom. Before departing, he received a warm send-off from the tribe. After days of living together, Fairborn had been deeply moved by the tribe's simplicity and kindness. He silently swore that he would help them achieve independence after the war, but when he returned to headquarters and reported the tribe's request, his superior told him that all land in this region belonged to the British Empire. Anyone attempting to split the territory would meet a grim end. The officer even suggested that Fairborn simply fabricate a fake agreement and take it back, but the stubborn Fairborn insisted that MacArthur must personally sign it, because it was a promise he had made to Chief Leroyd. Under Fairborn's persistent insistence, the officer had no choice but to bring him before MacArthur. After hearing Fairborn's explanation, MacArthur said nothing and directly signed his name on the agreement. Fairborn then rushed back to the tribe without delay and personally handed the agreement to Chief Leroyd. Leroyd read the agreement again and again, overwhelmed with joy, because as a leader, he had finally done something monumental for his people. But kind-hearted Fairborn sensed from his superior's attitude and MacArthur's expression that the agreement was unreliable. He kindly warned Leroyd that it was only a piece of paper and that breaking promises was common. Leroyd understood this as well, but having already been forced into cooperation, he had no choice but to trust the Allies. Half a month passed in the blink of an eye. To test the results of the tribe's training, they led a small unit out of the jungle toward the coast to ambush Japanese troops. After a difficult search, they finally discovered a Japanese patrol near a small river. At the sight of the Japanese soldiers, Fairborn was filled with excitement. Having served for more than half a year in rear positions, he had never seen Japanese troops up close. Unable to contain his excitement, he stood up and ran closer to take photos. But just as he was about to press the shutter, the Japanese soldiers suddenly turned around. Realizing what was happening, the Japanese quickly raised their rifles to fight. Fortunately, Fairborn's companion appeared in time and shot the Japanese soldier first. Hearing the gunfire, the remaining Japanese immediately opened heavy fire. Their position exposed, they lost the element of surprise. To preserve their strength, they were forced to retreat back into the forest. After reaching cover, Chief Leroyd suddenly realized that Fairborn, who had been taking photos, was missing. With no other choice, Leroyd retraced his steps to search for him. At this moment, Fairborn had already lost his way in the forest. His beloved camera fell to the ground and ended up in Japanese hands. Exhausted and desperate to escape pursuit, he crawled forward using his last strength. In the end, he collapsed from exhaustion. Fortunately, Chief Leroyd discovered him in time. Without hesitation, Leroyd rushed toward the unconscious Fairborn. At that moment, the pursuing Japanese soldiers appeared nearby. They immediately opened fire on Leroyd. Ignoring the danger, Leroyd charged forward, lifted Fairborn onto his shoulder, and fled into the jungle. Luckily, the Japanese stopped their pursuit once they entered the forest. With the war nearing its end and manpower depleted, the Japanese did not dare enter the jungle. Leroyd and Fairborn narrowly escaped and survived. After this incident, the bond between Leroyd and Fairborn deepened rapidly, becoming brothers who had faced life and death together. Fairborn even dreamed of bringing his fiancée to live in the tribe after the war. A few days later, the Allied full-scale counteroffensive in the Pacific officially began. Soon, defeated Japanese troops retreated from the coast and fled into the jungle. The order given to Leroyd's tribe was to use their knowledge of the terrain to eliminate all fleeing Japanese soldiers. Already terrified and demoralized, The Japanese suffered heavy losses with minimal casualties to the tribe, but they soon realized a serious problem. Whenever attacked, the Japanese would immediately scatter and disappear. Over time, more and more Japanese soldiers accumulated in the jungle. Once regrouped and reorganized, they would pose a grave threat to the tribe. Leroy's wife seemed to foresee the tragedy ahead. She begged him to stop hunting the Japanese. She wanted him to stay and protect the elders, women, and children. She feared that if all the young men left, no one would defend the village if Japanese troops arrived. Leroy did not follow her advice and instead led the warriors out again. This time, he left a small group behind to protect the vulnerable. Under everyone's gaze, the group slowly departed. Leroy never imagined that this decision would haunt him for the rest of his life. His wife soon discovered a large number of retreating Japanese soldiers approaching the village. At that moment, nearly all the men were away fighting. The village was left with mostly elders, women, and children. As the leader's wife, she loaded her weapon and resolved to defend her people, but her resistance was insignificant against the overwhelming force. When Leroy returned with his warriors, they saw Japanese soldiers celebrating in the village. Without hesitation, Leroy launched an attack. The defeated Japanese fled into the forest after a token resistance. After driving them away, Leroy rushed home. The village had been devastated, and inside his house lay the bodies of his wife and children. In despair, he set the house ablaze. He then resolved to pursue the retreating Japanese with all remaining warriors. Fairborn tried desperately to stop him, urging rest and resupply, but overwhelmed by grief and rage, Leroy would not listen. He led the warriors forward, singing funeral chants as they pursued the enemy. Using their knowledge of the terrain, they soon found the Japanese resting by a river. They unleashed their fury, firing shot after shot. Although they eliminated the enemy unit, they suffered heavy losses due to lack of ammunition. Fairborn again told Leroy that such sacrifices could have been avoided, but having lost everything, Leroy remained silent. After a long silence, he told Fairborn that he had fought only to protect his family and tribe, yet brought disaster upon them. From that day on, he would no longer fight alongside the Allies. He dropped his weapon and chose to live out his remaining days in peace with his people. Fairborn had no choice but to leave. The brothers who had shared life and death parted ways. Time passed, and the Japanese eventually surrendered unconditionally, ending World War II. Fairborn was later wounded and hospitalized. One day, his superior ordered him to return to persuade Leroy to submit. The British would not allow an independent kingdom within their territory. Furious, Fairborn produced the agreement signed by MacArthur, but his superior said MacArthur was American and had no authority over British interests. It was clear the British never intended to honor the agreement. Despite his anger, Fairborn was powerless. To protect his people, Leroy was forced to submit to British rule. To dismantle the tribe, Leroy was arrested as a deserter. I am a film enthusiast. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.